Another Bible time. And I'm glad you're joining me here on this Thursday as we continue through the Old Testament, a 2-year program that we have at Believers Fellowship, reading through the whole Old Testament. And this is Bible time. I'm Pastor Bruce, and we're going to be looking today at Job 22 through 24. And again, this is still Job and his friends interacting. And in chapter 22, we hear again from Eliphaz. This is his third contribution to the conversation. And really, he doesn't say anything new, but you got to notice as you look at this, he makes a bunch of empty accusations against Job that are really cruel when you look at him and you think about it. I mean, he doesn't know. He's assuming things about Job and making these wild accusations against him. Well, Job responds in chapters 23 and 24, and he doesn't even dignify Eliphaz's accusations by answering them directly. He wants to present his case straight to God. But as Job kind of says here, God's nowhere to be found. And Job might come later on in the book to regret some of these things, wanting to bring his case before God. But he does display a confidence in God. In chapter 23, verse 10, he says that God knows the way that I take. He knows that God is all-knowing. And he says, when he has tried me, I shall come out as gold. Now, interpreters differ on how to understand that. But it certainly is a true statement the way you would understand it just reading it in the translation that we have, that God tries his people. He brings trials into his people's lives, and the purpose of that is to refine their faith and to purify it. And that's certainly what's happening with Job, is God is putting triumphant faith on display for Satan and all the host of demons and for all the world to see as it's recorded here in the Bible. And he is no doubt refining Job's faith here, and we'll see that for sure at the end. And Job recognizes God's sovereignty, and he is rightfully terrified. He wants to bring his case before God, but he has a right sense of terror about entering before God. And in chapter 24, he does make some interesting and important statements. He does say that evil seems to flourish. That's something that we saw yesterday. Evil does seem to flourish, but they will face destruction ultimately. He knows that that's what will happen ultimately. They may seem to be flourishing now, but ultimately they will face destruction, judgment from God. But the difference in how Job understands that and how his friends understand it, the friends understand it that the wrath and the judgment will come immediately. And they're saying that's what's happening to Job. Job is saying, no, that's not the way it works, that the evil can seem to flourish, but in the end, they will face judgment ultimately. If they don't face it in this life, they will face it ultimately. But there's one thing I want you to take note of here on this Thursday, and that is back in chapter 22 when Eliphaz is bringing his accusations. He says in verse 22, chapter 22, verse 22, he says to Job, hey, receive instruction from his mouth, God's mouth, and lay up his words in your heart. He's exhorting Job to listen to God's word and store it up in his heart, like Job's not doing that. And the one thing that Job does say in response to that is found in verse 12 of chapter 23, which is one of the most outstanding statements in all the Bible. You should have this circled, you should have this memorized. This is something that you should be thinking about. He says, I have not departed from the commandment of his lips. I have treasured the words of his mouth more than my portion of food. Job is recognizing what God will say when Deuteronomy is written, that man doesn't live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Job is saying that here. He's saying God's word is more valuable, more important, more treasured to me than my food is. That's an important statement. That's a really practical statement for you and me. That's something for you and me to think about in our own lives. Where do we place the value of God's word in our life? And particularly at this time of the year, we're doing a lot of fine eating usually around this time. A lot of special meals are being prepared and consumed. during this time of the holidays, and that's fine. There's things to rejoice about, and enjoying good food is certainly a legitimate part of that. But where do you place God's word in all of that? Is God's word more valuable to you, more treasure to you, more important to you? I mean, would you give up a meal if that's what it meant in order to get some of God's word? Those are things to think about on this Thursday as you and I face the realities of life. Fortunately, nothing like what Job was facing. But as we face the realities of life, the thing that's going to make the difference is, what are we eating? Are we eating God's word? Is that the thing that's most important to us? That'll make the huge difference. And that's what I hope is the case for many of you. And I hope that that's even the reason why you're involved with watching Bible Time. And I would encourage you to keep consuming God's word all you can. And we'll be back tomorrow for more Bible Time.